Interesting. Our next speaker, Nick West, knows all about entrepreneurship. He served as finance director at Definitive Group in the UK and is the founder of Enable Business Consulting. He has been working in and for the entrepreneurial business sector since 1986. He's here to tell us how to get started with his lightning keynote on the entrepreneurial spirit. Please join me in welcoming veteran Lightning Talks presenter, Nick West.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I feel somewhat like Ricky Gervais. I arrive on stage with a microphone and a drink in one hand. So I'm just going to put it over here. If I go quiet part way through and you can see my lips moving but there's no sound, it's not Lucas. It's that I had laryngitis over the weekend. So my apologies if I do go quiet. I'd like to thank the organisers of Mark It Up and Lightning Talks for inviting me today. And then I'd immediately like to apologise because I'm actually not going to talk about the topic that I was supposed to be talking about, how small businesses make it big. Instead, I want to talk to you about two concepts and a framework, which loosely work out into how small businesses make it big, but also how entrepreneurs become successful. So these two concepts, fairly straightforward. The first one is friction. Everyone familiar with friction? Anyone like a little bit of friction? Oh, get your minds out of the gutter, you lot. Really, students the world over, they're exactly the same, fortunately. The second thing I want to talk about is trust and the interrelationship between friction and trust. Sounding more like one of the sort of the moral debates that one might have here. When it comes to friction, it's really important to identify good friction versus bad friction. So, quick example. Good friction, it's a cold winter's day, you rub your hands to warm them up, you get that tingly sensation. That's good friction. You're riding your bike down the road, you come off it, you get road rash, blood all over the place. That's bad friction. In the real world, in the physical world, it's quite easy to identify good friction or bad friction. One hurts, one doesn't. But in the business world, how do you identify what is good friction and what isn't? Good friction could be negative feedback from a customer. Steve Jobs is famously supposed to have badgered his engineers to make the iPhone as small as possible, a trend which we now have seen reversed. But at the time, to test whether or not they had made it as small as possible, he took this phone and dropped it in a jug of water. Did any air bubbles come out? If so, the phone was not as small as it could be. Now, if you were one of the engineers, is that good friction or bad friction? I don't know. As an engineer originally, I'd consider that bad friction. I'd be really hacked off if somebody dropped my wonderful piece of work into a jug of water. But as a motivational tool to see if any air bubbles came out, that's really positive friction. If they did, then it provides traction to move forward, to make positive changes. So positive friction in a business sense could be, does it give me more traction? Does it move me forward? Do I get feedback on the blog posts I put out? Is it positive feedback or negative feedback? But feedback is traction. It helps you move in the right direction. But what about trust? How are trust and friction related? Well, the bigger the thing you're trying to do, the more friction there is going to be. You try and push an elephant across the stage, it's going to be really hard work because there's a lot of friction on those 4 feet on the stage. I was backstage, actually, and it is a delight back there. There are so many toys. There are hot glue guns, there are table saws, all kinds of things that you would want to play with. But there are lots of casters as well that you can attach to the bottom of things, so you can slide everything around easily. You attach 4 casters to the 4 feet of your elephant, and now try pushing it. It's much easier because you've reduced the friction. So how do you reduce friction? And that brings me to trust. If you think about trust and building trust, I'm sure a lot of you are marketing students, and this is a university, so there are academic resources available to you. You will find somewhere buried deep in your research that there are 6 building blocks to building trust for teams. I could, if I had my glasses with me, take out the piece of paper that is in my pocket and read off the name of the researchers, but I don't, so I can't. If any of you come from a sales background, you'll know that there is another set of research, and I know one of the researchers was Swan, and it was done in 1999, which look at 5 ways in which, in a selling environment, you can build trust. So team building, there's friction. As an entrepreneur, you need to build a team. You need to sell. So immediately, within these 2 ideas of friction and trust, there are resources for you to go to say, there are 6 ways in which I can help build a team, that I can use specific tools to move my team forward in a positive direction. Same with selling. 5 building blocks of trust that overcome the friction that represents a buyer not buying from you. So if we think about some of those tools that you could use for selling, just checking the time there. Good. For selling, expertise. I mean, you would expect to know about your products and your services. So expertise is key. Then, likability. What is likability? Well, relatively recently, we've had this idea of social intelligence put forwards. Social intelligence really is likability. Do you know when to say the right thing? Do you know when to dress appropriately? Do you know how to behave in a way that is going to make people like you? If you have any doubts about your likability, don't ask your mum. Don't ask your friends, because that is really questioning their judgment. What I suggest you do is get hold of a book by a chap called Carl Albrecht called Social Intelligence. And it's really interesting because you go into that book and you think, I'm a kind of likable chap. And there are quizzes in there and little tests that you can do for yourself. And you come out at the end of the book thinking, my God, I'm amazed I've got any friends at all. So get hold of it and do some of the exercises in there and find out whether you're likable. Because being likable will help you enormously as an entrepreneur. It's not necessary, but it will certainly help you. So we've had likability, we've had expertise, we then have what they call seller's orientation, which kind of makes me think about the first week at university because, you have the orientations and how much can you drink and all of that kind of stuff. It's not that kind of orientation, nor is it sexual orientation, I believe. It's how do you sell? Are you that hard sell? Are you that archetypal used car salesman? Are you the archetypal life insurance saleswoman? Do you want this one or that one? Well, I don't want either of them. No, I'm giving you a choice. Which one do you want, this or that? So your selling orientation really affects whether you build trust. The more pushy you are, the less trust you build. In the long term. You might make a sale in the short term, but not in the long term. So what I want you to think about overall is the link between friction and trust and how you act as an entrepreneur when you're growing your business. Do the steps I take, is the communication I take part in positive in generating less friction, positive in generating positive friction, or is it there to build trust?
Nick has this uncanny ability in every lightning talks to finish just as the red light hits the last word. He stretches that last breath out. It's brilliant. I love watching that. Any questions for
relationships. Some lights coming. There's a question up in the very back row.
Spoke about reducing friction. I just want to ask you whether we should reduce friction or it is better to have friction because it keeps you on your toes every now and then. It's a good one.
Good. You're doing it wrong if it's keeping you on your toes. In terms of friction, it's important to recognize the difference between good friction and bad friction, in that friction will provide traction and will move you forwards. Without that element of friction, it's a bit like me the first time I went ice skating. I went nowhere. I just fell over and it was kind of ridiculous and embarrassing. So having traction created by friction is very, very necessary. And the kind of friction that gives you feedback that allows you to improve, which should always be your aim, to be better tomorrow than I am today, that kind of friction is really positive. I know there's another question over here.
As an entrepreneur, how beneficial in your professional career was the word no?
I'm glad you asked about that in a professional capacity. The word no is enormously important. You need to say no to the wrong investors. You need to say no to the wrong clients. You need to say no when you find out that a team member is not a good fit. You need to be able to say no. It's fundamental to being successful.
So we're going to cut everybody at 2 questions because all of the speakers are going to meet with you in the lobby afterwards for networking, and if you've developed any further questions for them after that, then we'll get some good back and forth going up in the lobby. Thank you very much, Nick West, again.